3 weeks since the Russian-Ukrainian war started. It's a long period for such an operation. The Russian army invaded Ukraine. They wanted blitzkrieg but failed. Just in comparison, the first phase of the American intrusion into Iraq in 2003 was completed in such term. They seized Baghdad and Saddam Hussein ran away. In Ukraine, the Russian army failed to seize neither the capital, nor another big city yet. The only exception is Kherson. But even there they can't establish the new regime and pacify the citizens. There are some tough battles going on in other cities. Blocked Mariupol is being bombed for 2 weeks, but it resists heroically and doesn't capitulate despite of all the destruction and victims. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the experts, including in the Pentagon, predicted that Russia would win in a couple of days. But the war is still going on. Our video today is an analysis so that you could understand better what's going on at the front line in Ukraine and why the Russian army is so weak. The first question cannot be easily answered because of the uncertainty during the war. As of last weekend, the speed of the Russian army slowed down, and in some places stopped. At the moment, the Russian army is underpopulated, and considering the fact that it's spread through different front lines, their quantity in the separate places is smaller than that of the Ukrainian army. If the Russian army doesn't get any help, its offensive capability will be diminished very soon. Current military maps with huge colored territories allegedly controlled by the Russian army do not really represent the real situation. In reality, the Russian army is moving forward in columns on the roads but not as one front line. Therefore, the Russian army controls not those huge territories but some narrow strips of land along the roads. So, the most important task for the Russian army is not to move forward but to expand its controlled areas to the right and to the left from the roads. The Russian army has to make efforts to protect its own back from the Ukrainian army, which actively destroys the supply columns of the invading Russian army. The offensive army is searching for weaknesses in the defense and moving forward very slowly. At the same time, the Russian army is trying to surround Kiev. In Donbass, the Russian army is moving forward just for a couple of kilometers or even hundreds of meters per day. The toughest battles happen here. It's here, in Donbass, where the most capable part of the Ukrainian army is located. Therefore, the Russian army wants to surround and destroy it. But the DNR and LNR army is not the Russian army. So the Russian Ministry of Defense doesn't feel any responsibility for their losses, and they could be used as cannon fodder being thrown into frontal attacks. But according to some data, the Russian army might be treated this way as well. Mariupol, Sumy, Konotop and Chernihiv are still being sieged. Kharkiv is semi-sieged. It's not blocked entirely. The occupation of its suburbs and the further movement in the cities is slowed down. The Russian aviation and tactical guided missile systems started to strike far deeper into Ukraine, both military and civilian infrastructure, including power stations and communication infrastructure. Both sides use unmanned aerial vehicles. The Ukrainian side publishes dramatic videos where the Turkish Bayraktar UAV destroys Russian land equipment. But it seems the Ukrainian army doesn't have enough UAV to change the course of the war significantly. Many of them are destroyed and the new ones aren't coming fast enough. We shouldn't overestimate the anti-Russian meetings in the occupied towns, but I'd like to add that the moral impact of such meetings could be significant. The Russian soldiers were told that they would be greeted as liberators, but in reality turn around and go away is the most polite thing they could hear from the locals. Russian soldier is a fascist and an occupant. This is in Kherson yesterday. Now let's talk about Mariupol. On March 13, the Pope himself urged everybody to pray for it. There are battles within the town's districts. Russian attacks become more frequent, and the citizens exhausted by the long blockade can't leave the fighting area. Here are some shots on how Mariupol looks like today after the so-called liberation troops came. Mariupol is very important for a land corridor to the Crimea on the coast of the Azov Sea. Actually, it stands in the way of two converging strikes from the Crimea and DNR. But according to some data, this corridor has already been arranged bypassing the stubborn city. This is the analysis of the current situation at the front line. In short, blitzkrieg didn't happen, the Russian troops are stuck, they've managed to occupy Kherson, not completely though, And the Ukrainians are fighting heroically, and managed to fight off most of the attacks. Now let's discuss how it happened that the Russian army was expected to win quickly but instead it has lost this war to Ukraine. Russian propaganda has been depicting their army as powerful and invincible for many years. Don't make our Iskanders laugh, Armada tanks and the invincible missiles shown by Putin in cartoons. That picture was created for everyone to believe in the power of the Russian army. But what does it look like in reality? And why isn't the strong army good for the autocratic government? The propaganda shows us the invincible Russian power, but when it came to a real conflict, we saw the picture we used to see during the wars in Afghanistan and Chechnya. The same conscript soldiers, pseudo-contract soldiers, dirty and hungry. They have no idea why they are here. In fact, it's not easy to understand. You can't find any sense in this war even if you try. And you can easily understand the soldiers who don't want to risk their lives and kill the Ukrainians for no reason at all. Apart from some modern equipment, we see the photos of burnt T-72 tanks, and it's not the most modern equipment. As well as BMP-2 introduced into service in 1980. We can also see the legendary MTLBs being produced since the 1960s. But the problem is not only in the equipment. Since the end of World War II, the Russian army almost hasn't had any experience of fighting with other forces. There were several local conflicts, the most well-known were in Afghanistan and Chechnya. But even then the army confronted non-regular forces but just some partisan units. They had almost no heavy armaments and no aviation. They didn't try to keep the front line but attacked military columns from the ambushes. And even so, Russia lost those two local wars, Afghanistan and the First War in Chechnya, despite the overwhelming material and technical superiority. Since World War II, Russia has never led a war against some foreign regular army. The only exception was the war with Georgia in 2008 when the Russian army crushed the small army of Georgia. The army of Russia is weak not only in terms of its military value. It's also a weak social institution. Autocrats like to create several force institutions and set them against each other. They do it to avoid the most horrible thing, the creation of one force center which could go after their power. They do need an army, of course, but it shouldn't become more powerful than the intelligence agencies and other force institutions. That's why the government pays no attention to horrible corruption, creates military authorities by negative selection and immobilizes the army with bureaucracy. It's important for them that the influence of the army and its power couldn't endanger the stability of the regime. On February 24, Putin started his special operation in Ukraine. The Ukraine invasion is a full-scale war. But according to Putin, it's just a special operation. Sounds stupid? Yes, but there's something hidden underneath. The Russian regime is a regime of cosplayers, some security chiefs who pretend to be soldiers and who are hungry for military glory. Playing as the soldiers of the state security, they unexpectedly became involved in a real war. When Putin started this invasion, his judgment was based on some erroneous ideas. He didn't expect resistance. As we understand now, the 5th unit of FSB, which collected the secret information in Ukraine, reported that their neighbor's political reality is a fake, just like in Russia. They said that the Ukrainians would meet the Russian army willingly. But why did they say that? Because that's what Putin wanted to hear. Any sensible person would understand that giving the president false information is dangerous. But it looks like intelligence lacks sensible people as well. This negative selection worked for them as well as for the army. According to some data, the head of the 5th unit of FSB, Sergei Beseda, and his deputy are under home arrest. They are accused of wasting money for operations and providing low-quality intelligence data. Beseda exaggerated pro-Russian sentiments among the Ukrainians and lied to Putin about the perspectives of such intrusion. The Russian army invaded Ukraine with insufficient force, nearly 150,000 of soldiers and officers. Even if we add the armed units of DNR and LNR, there wouldn't be enough to lead a war on the territory of the second largest country in Europe. Moreover, the military forces of Ukraine on the eve of the war had 260,000 troops without mobilized reserves. In the real world, not in some imaginary universe where the Ukrainian army goes home and the locals greet Russian liberators and throw flowers to Russian tanks, to achieve success the Russian army needed 3 times more people, involvement of the whole operative units, all arms armies as well as air defense and air forces armies, and the Navy. They needed to prepare hundreds of thousand tons of military supplies before the intrusion. They had to settle hospitals beforehand. They had to make a lot of full-scale arrangements. And of course, the offensive army had to be arranged in several columns. First of all, to be able to perform rotation, to lead the exhausted troops to the rear and immediately put the new troops back into position. Secondly, to control the already seized areas, to arrange the rear, to set military posts in the cities and villages, and safeguard the roads for the supplies. To achieve that they needed a lot of soldiers, officers, and machinery. They also had to think about the accommodation of the army. The Ukrainian soldiers defending the cities are warm, but the Russian soldiers are freezing in the fields within the sub-zero temperature. All of that is basic, textbook, and the Russian army should have prepared that before they occupy any foreign country. Yet nothing was prepared. The forces who invaded Ukraine on February 24 rapidly exhausted their offensive potential, and other forces were not available. The big cities like Chernihiv, Sumy and Kharkiv are still defending themselves in the rear of the Russian troops. The Russian supply columns are attacked in the underprotected areas, which is only worsening the lack of material resources. Before the land forces started the invasion, the Russian army performed a massive fire attack on Ukrainian military warehouses, control stations and airfields. There were almost no attacks on the manpower. Then they suggested the Ukrainian soldiers consider the Russians friends. They weren't attacked for that reason. Vladimir Putin said that. He thought that one missile strike to military objects would be enough to proceed further without any resistance. This was definitely not enough for a country like France with a population of more than 40 million people. Here is one more important thing. From the military point of view, it's completely idiotic to ask the Russian army to distinct the ideologic Nazis and simple Ukrainian soldiers. On the third week of the war, we've completely forgotten that at the beginning it was about that. It was supposed that the Russian army would sort things out right there, where the neo-Nazis are and where the regular Ukrainian soldiers are. This task could be given just by an ideologist or a political instructor instead of a professional military man. This task is absurd. It adds uncertainty and confuses the offensive army, slowing down its proactivity. And that's what has happened. One more reason why Blitzkrieg failed is psychological. To perform a real Blitzkrieg in Ukraine, there should be the Second Wehrmacht. It would be necessary not only to attack the cities but to demolish them completely to make the assault of the city districts easier. You would have to lead a war not just against the army but against the whole population, which is not loyal and resistant. The irony is that to denazify Ukraine you have to be a Nazi yourself instead of a liberator. So to speak, Vladimir Putin wasn't prepared for this war indeed. He wanted to perform a quick, painless special operation. The operation when the whole Ukrainian army goes home and the Russian troops enter the cities, suppress small meetings organized by some Nazis, and that's the end of it. During this operation just inanimate objects should have been destroyed, like warehouses or airfields. And a couple of neo-Nazi units, of course. But there are no regrets about them. The whole Ukraine dreamed that the Russians would come and save them. That's how they reported it to the commander-in-chief about the Ukrainians' morale in order not to spoil his own morale. Putin spent his whole career performing such operations. In Chechnya, Georgia, and Syria. They didn't have any war with the regular army. He expected this time it would be the same and he could have one more victorious special operation. He relied on his previous experience and the intelligence data telling him everything's just fine. But Ukraine has changed for the last 8 years. They were prepared that the Russian army would attack in the open, and the FSB just embarrassed itself with those reports. Now Putin is desperately trying to reinforce the army, which suffered significant losses. The most evident option is to use the Belarusian troops. But here is one more serious problem. The people of Belarus don't want any war with Ukraine. And considering the fact that Lukashenko is not a legitimate leader, which is obvious to everyone, this order of invasion could easily become the last in his career. The Belarusian soldiers could arrange an intrusion into Minsk instead of Kyiv, and his special police forces wouldn't help him. Therefore, one more option occurred, to involve the so-called volunteers but in fact some mercenaries from the Middle East, mostly Syria. It looks like it's nearly 16,000 contractors. The fighting abilities of these Syrian men are questionable, and their motivation even more so. It's obvious that Russia is stuck in Ukraine, both literally and metaphorically. The spring muddy season is about to begin, the area for action is narrowing down to the asphalted roads. It provides advantages for the defense. It's much easier to defend several roads instead of the huge areas of fields and forests. And it's easier to attack the caravans moving on these roads to the front line and back. The problems with logistics, fuel, and supplies delivery, as well as the problems with the general control of the Russian troops in Ukraine, are already obvious even to non-professionals. It's likely that both sides won't achieve any domination right now. It looks like the power of the Ukrainian army is not enough to liberate the seized cities, banish the Russians from their positions and make them run away. The Russian troops, on the other hand, could occupy Kyiv and Kharkiv, just completely demolishing them, which would result in a huge amount of victims among the civilians. There is just one way: to call off the troops from Ukraine and start talking about a peaceful settlement, and to decide how to live further. But it looks like the Russian government hasn't appreciated yet how deeply they are stuck. Putin and Shoigu haven't understood yet that the army they created can't perform tasks like to seize Ukraine. Perhaps the situation will change if the president of Russia is removed from office. Let's hope it happens soon. Thanks for listening and subscribe to the channel. Till tomorrow.